What's up troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and it's an exciting time to be a Battlefield gamer. As we saw last night during EA Play, the first ever gameplay has been revealed, and I think it's safe to say that Battlefield 1 is looking like a fantastic title, and arguably a contender for the Battlefield franchise in terms of just how good it's going to get. Now, today I thought I'd go through my general impressions, what I thought about the game, things that I picked up on the live stream. There were a lot of small things as well here and there that I wanted to pick out, and things that I felt kind of went unnoticed in the grand scheme of things, but overall added to Battlefield 1 as a title. So I've broken it down into a list of positives and negatives, and I may go off on a tangent here and there whilst mentioning a few things, but ultimately I just wanted to give you guys my general consensus of what I saw, because unfortunately I didn't get a chance to actually play the game myself. Hopefully there'll be a beta sometime soon where I can just, jump into my man cave and never touch society for about another week. And I'm just going to let you know how I feel about it and a couple of ideas that perhaps haven't crossed your mind in terms of Battlefield 1 as a title. So the first positive on my list is that there is seemingly no strange colour filter. Finally. In Battlefield 3, we had the blue colour filter. In Battlefield 4, we have this kind of weird colour palette. I don't know how to quite describe it, but it looks like they just went, do you know what? We're going to make everything look like shit. And then in Battlefield Hardline, they kind of didn't have one, so to speak, but I did feel as though there was a kind of brightening filter on the screen because it just seemed like everything was overly saturated and overly contrasted. But in Battlefield 1, we have none at all. We have no blue, no yellows. I mean, you guys have played Pub Market on Battlefield 4. It's a shambles. This thing's got this bright yellow filter, and it just doesn't do the game any justice. But finally, that appears not to be the case, and we just have a clear colour palette and no kind of filter on the screen, which was great to see for the first time in a Battlefield game since, I believe, the likes of 1943 and Bad Company 2, so that's always a nice bonus. Next up on my positive list was the revamped movement system, and they appear to have taken quite a few animations off of Star Wars Battlefront, and just general movement across the board appears to be completely reworked in terms of a Battlefield title. We're seeing players move quite quickly, we're also seeing a bit of staggering, we're seeing people turn quite sort of drastically in a way that their body kind of jerks around, and I feel like that's a nice addition to the game. There appears to be a added metric ton of movement animations, everything from busting straight through doors. You no longer have to wait for a prompt to appear to go through a door, you could just run straight through it. Hopping windows, just anything in general at the moment in terms of animations appears to be completely revived in how they've done it, and that's a really nice thing to see, because we're obviously seeing a game which has an entirely different pacing to previous Battlefield titles, and as such it needs its own animations and movement pace in general to match the weapons that suit the game, and it looks like that's been done, and it looks like it's been pulled off pretty successfully. And one thing I do want to point out is that there appears to be vehicle entry animations for the first time. No longer will you be able to just hold square and jump into the vehicle automatically. It looks like you're going to have to stop the vehicle, wait for the animation to play out, and then you'll finally be in, also implying that people could be killed during these animations whilst entering and exiting vehicles. But I think that's a good step in the right direction, bearing in mind most of these vehicles, maybe bar motorbikes, won't exactly be particularly fast-paced, but it just means that there's an overall added sense of realism, and we're not going to get people hopping out of vehicles at 7,000 miles per hour and not taking any damage, which is good. Next up is dynamic weather, and thank a fucking Lee. This has been on my list for any Battlefield title for God knows how long now, and it's just so great to see. It's been pulled off in the Frostbite engine, which I personally believe to be one of the most advanced and intricate engines going in terms of game development across the board, and it gives every single map it's on something to play with. It appears to be on every single map in the game, and that's just outstanding, and I just really have wanted that. It was on my wish list for Battlefield 5, or as we now know it to be Battlefield 1, and it's been on a wish list in terms of just Battlefield for a long time now. We've seen fog and rain, which both look fantastic. Even the water droplets, they stay on the gun and seem to shake off as you fire and things like that. And it's the little details like that that can really change up a map. Now, although you're playing a game that's set in a certain time and it's always got a preset kind of layout to it, the amount of dynamic weather can entirely shift how the gameplay plays out. You could have an entirely different tactic for foggy gameplay than you could have for clear day gameplay, and things like rain also add to the mix because it adds more audio to the gameplay, and it also makes things look different. It makes things less visually obvious, and it's just things like that, the small touches that can change up things. All of a sudden you've got a map that can embrace 4 different types of playstyles just purely down to the weather that's carried out, and I feel like that's a really important and really special move DICE have made, and hopefully we're going to see more significant night maps, because I feel like those were quite successful in Battlefield 4 and in Battlefield Hardline. More night maps and more sort of like morning and just general different times of day that we haven't seen before, I feel will be quite successful in Battlefield 1 as a whole. Next up is the massive level of destruction that we are finally seeing in Battlefield since Bad Company 2, and I do believe that that is a bold statement to make, but a correct one nonetheless. Now, judging from what I saw, it appeared that almost every single building on that map that they played was entirely destructible, and it looks like that's going to be a trend that continues across the game. There was even things like ground deformation on a pretty massive scale, and it looks like there are going to be things such as shovels, and it wouldn't surprise me to see people digging trenches or digging small holes into the ground to set themselves up and get themselves dug in for certain offensives and defenses, and it looks fantastic. When tanks explode, they leave these huge holes in the ground. Now, although this is somewhat evident in Battlefield 4, these holes aren't done particularly well, and the ground always looks a little bit messed up. In this time, it seems to be done pretty well right. The physics engine seems to have been caught on a bit, and it seems to be making a lot more sense in terms of the explosions that are happening, and just in general, seeing entire buildings being collapsed and destroyed. And it isn't a preset Levolution animation by the looks of things. It just looks like these buildings are being taken down progressively, and they could fall in all manners of styles, or they could just be completely crushed under, for example, the airship, which, by the way, in itself is a fantastic event. This thing isn't a Levolution event. I don't even think the term Levolution exists in Battlefield 1, and it can go down anywhere on the map, and wherever it falls, it causes a certain level of destruction below, sometimes even complete destruction, and the actual carcass of the airship is left behind, which I thought was incredibly impressive to see, and I think it just represents an overall shift in complexity in the Frostbite engine, where things that we previously had to see in preset animations are now being opened up to things that just happen naturally in the game, and I feel like DICE should be very proud of that achievement as a whole, because in the end of the day, that was kind of what they hoped to achieve on the Frostbite engine, and it looks like they're taking some big steps towards that. Next up on the positive list was lots of variety. We saw a shit ton of weapons, a lot of gadgets, a lot of tanks, a lot of aircraft, a lot of just everything really, a lot of weather, a lot of like map detail, and it just seemed like everything had a rich level of content. Although we were concerned about Battlefield 1 not having a certain level of customization, it appears they do have some on some of the sort of weapons that they've added in. I've seen some sites which I'm pretty sure didn't really exist in World War 1, but they've kind of thrown it in and tried to sort of sync it to the timeline and make it look authentic. But it just seems as a whole, due to the amount of weapons, due to the different styles, and just the general variety of the game in terms of tanks and in terms of the vehicles we have and in terms of the maps and the dynamic weather, it looks like in terms of content we're not going to be complaining very much, and I think that's a very important factor of Battlefield 1 and making sure that it stays fresh. Next one for me is audio. Now, if you were watching the stream, there were brief times when the people weren't talking, and the audio actually appeared to me as being very rich, and some of the sounds that I heard off the rifles, the semi-automatic ones in particular, were incredibly impressive and incredibly authentic as well. And we've known now for a long time that DICE are practically audio experts. They've won audio awards in pretty much every back-to-back Battlefield title they've made, and I expect very little to change in this Battlefield title, and audio prowess just seems to be something that will be in Battlefield 1 regardless. And next up for the positives, and this is the last one that I'm going to list, is the UI, and I think the UI has been done very well. I do have one complaint, which we'll talk about in a second, but overall I feel as though it's very minimalist. It looks like it's been pulled together very well, and I feel like it's going to be a successful UI for Battlefield 1. It resembles a lot of 1943, and I think that that's a good thing. I feel like they haven't gone over the top. They've also made things a bit more simplified, so to speak, like the counters and things like that have just been, you know, in terms of their complexity, have been reduced to a level that works, in my opinion. And it looks like they've taken a leaf out of Star Wars Battlefront book, which some people complained about, but I don't think is a complaint at all. It looks better. It looks clearer. The everything from the text to the way things are just laid out in general looks fantastic. And also, one last thing I forgot to add in terms of the positives list is the spawn screen. Now, I don't know if you guys got to see this thing, but literally it is a top-down tactical view of the map. Everything that happens below is happening in real time. So if there was an explosion or a building collapsed and I'm on the spawn screen, I can see that going down below me. And I think that's an impressive move. I feel like it will add a lot of benefits to those who are spawning in, because they'll be able to see bullet traces and things like that popping off, and they won't be completely disorientated when they jump into the battle. And I feel like that adds a certain level of tacticality as well in terms of choosing your spawns, which I was very impressed with. So next up is the negatives, and I have a very minimal amount of negatives, just because I just need more information and need to play the game myself at this time. The first one is the UI. Although it looks great, I do have one gripe with how enemy players appear. Now, the Dorito chip that we're used to, the triangular red dot, that appears to have been placed with some kind of circular symbol, and I'm not a fan of this. I don't think it's beneficial to be having players spotted in such a way that they have this massive circular red thing over their heads. It just isn't. A, it doesn't look good, and B, it just seems very disruptive in terms of immersion and gameplay. And I was kind of hoping they were going for more of like I would go for a pulsing symbol personally, a red dot that sort of flashes and disappears and flashes and disappears again. So I do hope they change that up quite a bit. Like I say, this was pre-alpha, so lots of time ahead, and I'm sure that's going to be a complaint that they're going to listen to, because they have been working on how to spot enemies before. And the next one is the woman's voice. She seemed to just be commentating the entire way through. It was like, oh, we have lost Objective Edward, and all of a sudden we have gained Objective A, and I'm just like, I get that might be beneficial, but it needs to be something that can be turned off, because in my opinion, I don't need to see that. I don't need to hear that. I don't need those prompts or reminders, because I will be looking at the top bar, which will explain these objectives and will tell me what is wrong with them, or which one's being captured and which ones aren't. So I feel like that's something, although I do feel like it kind of fits the era and it's acceptable to have there, I don't think I would complain too much about, it doesn't seem too high tech. It seems like something which is feasible in terms of radio comms. I just feel as though I would like the option to turn it off as a player who doesn't need that kind of prompt to exist. And my final negative isn't really a negative as such, it's just a general worry about the balancing of the game, because it's a tough one to balance. We're seeing SMGs and shotguns, we're seeing sniper rifles. I saw a couple of sniper rifles, and these were some players who I know are astute Battlefield players, they've played a lot, and they were missing shots left, right and centre, and it looked like they couldn't hit for shit. And that was due to the fact that players moved so quickly. So I feel like something might need to be done with that capacity, and I'm quite worried about semi-automatic rifles, because I feel as though they need to be done just right in order for them to be a successful use on the battlefield, bearing in mind they are pretty much replacing assault rifles in terms of weaponry. So I'm just generally worried about the time to kill and just sort of like how these weapons will be balanced, but I don't think it's a negative just yet. I feel like we've learned a lot about weapon balancing in the past 3 Battlefield titles, and I feel like that's only set to improve in Battlefield 1 with the era that we're in. So last thing I wanted to talk about were the maps, modes and classes in Battlefield 1, which were also revealed on the website and briefly spoken about during the actual EA Play event themselves. First one, we have the classes, and there's been a few changes here and there. First and foremost, the Assault class. This has now been merged seemingly with the Engineer class, and it's had its medic capabilities taken away from it. The Assault class seems to be the close quarters kind of combat situation, and it also appears to be the one that has the anti-tank grenades and things like that. So that's going to be the go-to class for blowing up vehicles. Next up is the Support class, and this is the guys with the fuck off big LMGs and ammo, as we've anticipated before, and they also have a couple of other gadgets here and there that haven't really been mentioned as of yet, but I imagine the Support class is going to be very much ammo orientated, and considering the guns that are in the game, that's going to be a key factor to keep an eye out for. Next one is the Medic class. The Medic class is its own standalone class that has been taken away from the Assault class. Now, I feel as though the Assault class is going to have sort of like SMGs and things like that, but the Medic class is actually the one that's going to have the semi-automatic rifles, or at least more of them, or a higher caliber of semi-automatic rifle to make it more appealing as a class. So that appears to be something that's happened, and I feel as though that's an important move that makes sense. I feel as though Assault classes had the ability to go too far standalone in previous Battlefield games. You could lone wolf far too much, but now they're kind of more reliant on their medics and their ammo because they have to blow up vehicles and they have to be on their toes pretty quickly. Finally, we have the Sniper class, and that's the Sniper class. There's not much more to say to it. You get a Sniper rifle, but it'll be interesting to see how the damage of the Sniper rifle works in coordination with the damage of the semi-automatic rifles, which is a concern that I do have in terms of balancing. And then we have actually vehicle classes as well. These are their own classes in the game, and they will have their own loadouts, which is pretty impressive. And you need to get to one of these classes in order to spawn into a vehicle. I feel as though you can jump in as a gunner if you're using any of the other ones, but in actually to spawn into a plane or a tank, you need the tank class or the pilot class. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of limitations will be put upon players who don't have these classes in terms of entering vehicles, and what kind of benefits those who choose these classes or what kind of weaponry they will have. So just something to keep an eye out for in the Battlefield 1 game. Next up is maps, and first off we have Amiens, which is a French city, and this looks like it's going to be a close quarters map, which actually has a railway running straight in front of it, so there will be a battle train running through this map, which is going to be incredibly interesting, and I think we saw it feature briefly on the trailer as well. We have the map called the Saint Quentin Scar, which is apparently a huge scale map in northern France. And this is part of the Kaiser's battle where Germany kind of throws everything towards the Allies, and it's a huge sort of wasteland kind of territory. And I feel like this is going to be a pretty interesting one, and it's a village that also features in between. And I think this is the one that actually featured in the stream at this time. Next up, we have Mont Grappa, which is a map which kind of sits itself in the Venetian Alps. It's going to be sort of like a terrain-based map with mountainsides and all sorts. And this is where the Austrians, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, had their fights with the Allies and the Italian army. And I feel like this is going to be a really cool map because it's lots of different kinds of terrain, specifically mountainous terrain, which we haven't seen feature very much in Battlefield titles before. And it has been seen in the trailers before. If you guys mentioned some of the dogfights that we saw in the first reveal trailer, some of that did take place above this map. Next up, we have Empire's Edge, which is the Atlantic coast where a fierce struggle appears to be taking place with some kind of island. So I think this is actually going to resemble a lot of what we saw in sort of Naval Strike, but on a larger scale. We're going to have an island which is completely populated by soldiers, but very much contested in the seas in terms of dominance on the ground. And this is the one that we saw with the soldier looking out into the distance. And it looks pretty badass, and dynamic weather on this thing is probably going to be pretty damn awesome too. And finally, we have the modes. Now, we have the traditional Conquest, which is making its return. Not much needs to be spoken about that. You guys have all played Conquest. We have Domination, which is obviously a small-scale version of Conquest, and is far more focused on actual, infantry-based gameplay and more close-quarters engagements as opposed to the larger-scale Conquest, which is vehicular-based. And then we have Operations. This is kind of an interesting take on trench warfare, I think, and essentially what happens is that there's a set of attackers and a set of defenders, and the defenders have to hold a certain area during the map. They have to hold their ground, or hold a line, so to speak, and then the attackers have to try and capture this line. But what happens, and what makes this incredibly interesting, is that when the attackers capture a line of defense, the defenders actually jump to a different map in the game. The line gets pushed back. So say, for example, if I was on Amiens and I lose a line of defense, all of a sudden I'm going to be playing on the Empire map, or I'm going to be playing on a different kind of map in the game. And that's really interesting because you're actually jumping in and around different maps during a single match. And it looks like this is going to be done relatively seamlessly as well. Which in my opinion sounds very interesting. If any of you have played Verdun at the moment, there's modes where literally the attackers go forward, they try and capture the trench. If they fail, the defenders push them back and then they try to capture the trench. It's going to be the same thing, but with just different land masses and not necessarily focusing on trenches, and it will actually bounce between maps. And I feel like this is going to be a very successful mode in Battlefield 1 and something to look forward to. So guys, that's it for my video today on Battlefield 1. That's the impressions and all the new intel that we had for the game. Let me know how you're feeling about Battlefield 1. I know I'm certainly looking forward to playing it. Also Titanfall 2 as well, because I found that to be an interesting title when it first released. And I feel like Titanfall 2 will actually step up their game and improve the formula that exists. And I imagine there's going to be some beta soon, so expect information on that coming in the next couple of weeks, I believe. And I'm really looking forward to playing this thing, and I hope a lot of you are too. So let me know what you think down in the comment section below if you enjoyed this video, and maybe I picked out a couple of things that you hadn't even noticed. Make sure you hit that like button, give it a share, and I would appreciate that greatly. So yeah, let's get a discussion going down in the comment section. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon in another video.